That's what Calix is for.
No dilly-dallying.
Yeah. And you know what works really well on really bad birds? What are we doing?
The Anthropocene is a moment in history. Critical zones are places and sites which then prove or disprove some of the interpretation given to the Anthropocene. So the Anthropocene is a very global term that covers the whole Earth and at very specific moment. And critical zones are small spots on the skin, if you want. The critical zone allows to give to have a handle on the Anthropocene. I think the Anthropocene is, of course, one of the reasons why we are so interested, but it's not the main. The main is to understand this interaction, which would have been to be understood anyway, even if the Anthropocene had not occurred.
We love the exemplarity of the bus ride to the critical zone with Bruno Latour as a means of getting the humanities out of the box, mobile, living the surprising, if specifically not good, adventure of the Anthropocene.
The Anthropocene is the new geological era that we find ourselves in when humans are the primary drivers of geological forces.
There's a lot of different people that are giving their best mental facilities to understanding what is the Anthropocene. The history of the Earth has been named by stratigraphers, and what they're after is they're looking for a point in the landscape, a strata, and it has very little to do with the history of humanity. It has everything to do with a very practical decision of finding a place that is global in scale and relatively synchronous in time, so that worldwide we can all say, oh, that's the Anthropocene boundary. Of course, the bigger question of what is the Anthropocene is so much more interesting, and that involves all of us.
What it means to be on Earth in this moment, but actually what it means to be human in this moment. I think one thing the Anthropocene redefines is what it means to be a member of this species. Humans having a profound impact on all of Earth's systems, including climate. We're not just talking about abstract systems that may or may not impact us, but a fundamental shift in human identity and how we hold that.
I think it's really important to parse out who it is that we're talking about when we say the Anthropocene describes human impacts on the planet. Because if we're not actually careful to talk about history or politics or society, then we don't actually understand how we got to the situation we're in, and we can't then address the problem. If you don't understand the history of an issue, you can't solve it.
On one hand, there's this human-centered view. There's a nostalgia for the garden that echoes within the speaking of the Anthropocene. On the other hand, there is a non-nostalgic, the chapter of human life on the planet is closing. Sucks for the humans, but here we go, what's next?
Where else to begin a scientific investigation within the Anthropocene except at a local scale? The global scale is nothing if not an accumulation of little places all together, countless places, and countlessly diverse places also. The world is so diverse from one place to another. It's a view of science in a different way in terms of data. And it means that a critical zone science means we share our data. We're not like hyper protective of it. We're looking at the same system from different points of view, different disciplines, and it's really almost incumbent that we share our data with our colleagues. And that puts the whole scientific enterprise in a very different frame of reference, I think, from one of hyper competition, protect my data before I'm not going to share it before I get my paper out, to one in which data are shared and we're all studying the same system, so we're all going to advance together as a team, as a little community. But how else are you going to kind of take advantage of these other disciplines if you're not going to share your data as they come online and after you demonstrate their quality?
And we're very interested in the metabolism. We all have a metabolism as organisms, but the Earth has a metabolism too, and it's highly organized, and CO2, carbon dioxide, just like we breathe into the air.
One of the key concepts of Western thought is that nature is a resource. And that is not how all groups of people imagine and understand nature. Now, when nature is conceptualized as a resource, the question is, how should you use your resource? That posture towards nature lets us imagine certain things and do certain things like, well, if nature is a resource, then what we're supposed to do is extract it and use it for ourselves, either for industrial use or for pleasure, like, oh, I really like nature walks, so I really want to make sure the forest is still there. Other groups of people don't conceptualize something as nature. So we think of ourselves as separate from nature, and nature is a set of resources. Many human communities, including human communities in Europe prior to, the 1400s and the 1500s, imagine nature as a set of relationships. These are just, you have a relationship with the land that you're on, you have a relationship with the water, you have a relationship with the tree, you have a relationship with the plants. This is all part of a web of relationships. And if you're in relationship with something, then ideas of reciprocity come in, which means that if you take, you give, etc. The inequalities that are contained and hidden sometimes in the term Anthropocene, it's really important to understand that not everybody views nature the same way, and not everyone has used nature in the same way.
I'm interested in the link between laboratory and field, basically. So critical zone is interesting because it's not a case where you bring the outside in the lab. On the contrary, much of the work is trying to take the lab and bring it in the field and transform the field into an instrumented, what I call intensive unit care, so to speak, for the earth soil. And that's interesting also for political reasons, because in a way, health is very developed and soil is very little developed. We were walking through the medical school here, and I think it's insane to see how much building they have, this guy in medicine. Buildings after building after building after building for our health, which is fine, but what about the health of the soil and of the planet? There are not that many buildings for that. And so there's a sort of a complete imbalance. We take enormous interest in our body, which is of course understandable, but see, this is small equipment. We know very little about the outside and what the earth is made of.
So you find that analogy to be helpful, the sick patient?
I do. I see a place where the analogy ceases to hold. How do we know that the ecosystem is sick? We do this work of anthropomorphizing and projecting, right? It's sick for us. I think that was part of his argument, was, and what he's written on is this game of attribution of agency, right? It's not sick for Gaia, it's sick for us. But there are lots of ways that we treat the slime layer on Gaia as if it is sick, and are committed, deeply committed to chronicling and mapping voxel by voxel, right? Its decline, its slipping away from some Edenic state.
Physiology is derived from pathological states, which are derived from the felt experience of illness, right? So it all begins with the complaint, with the perception that this is screwed up. It's the forest crying out, like the patient crying out, that becomes the motive for disciplines. I mean, Bruno began with instrumentation, right? We have so many instruments in medicine but it's to populate this zone of complaint.
As an ER doc, I was aware, sometimes painfully aware, that most of the people who came through would have done just fine on their own with duct tape and spit. It was a very small number of people who had bona fide emergencies, whose lives were prolonged or materially helped because of something that I was able to do in the emergency department. In my teaching of medical students, which is in a interdisciplinary humanities, social science kind of seminar space, I always challenge them early on by, asking them if we do anything to change mortality, right? Mortality is always 100%. And then they say, well, maybe not mortality, but morbidity. We are sure that there are places where we create new morbidity. It's not clear that we reduce suffering. This ambition that most medical students have and write in their applications, right? I want to reduce human suffering, is already a kind of naive hope. So you might argue that's a kind of nihilistic approach. I think it's good to think with heuristically, because if in fact we don't affect overall mortality, and we're only pushing around the morbidity curve, then what are we here for?
Full chemistry data? You're right. I think that it would be good to.
That was part of the challenge to the eco-scientists who came along on that trip. We're here to bear witness to human decline and to the suffering that goes along with it. You're not going to save this patient. You're not going to stop this patient from being sick. In Latour's words, Gaia is not sick. Or if she is sick, you're not, it's a terminal illness. We can at best palliate this person's suffering, but what we can do is bear witness to the demise of this ecosystem.
When you make a decision in the present has to be evaluated based on its impact on the seventh generation. So, we can count, who is that? It's me, my child, my grandchild, my great-grandchild, so my kid's grandkid, my kid's great-grandkid, my kid's grandkid's grandkid, right? We're talking, you think in terms of those people as you make decisions. And you think about the wisdom of 7 generations past. So you think about the advice that you got from your grandparents' grandparent. And you use their input in making a decision today, which is weird, right? We don't think about the wisdom of people in 1780 as we make political decisions. But this concept of 7th generation helps us realize that we should actually know what people were concerned about at that time, what they saw as the threats and the dangers or the wisdom, and we should be making political decisions now for 7 generations in the future. And so we know that humans can do this. Just because I need things instantaneously doesn't mean that it's natural that humans are like that. This is culture, and we can learn from and incorporate the wisdom of other cultures. And in fact, I think it's the only solution.
But getting everyone on the same page to think that way.
It's going to either be the hard way or the really hard way. The hard way is, actually doing this in terms of education, in terms of the stories that we tell. This is also, I think, maybe poetry will save us. Maybe art will rescue us. These things are ways of imagining different relationships. And this is where I think artists really, really, really have a very important role to play. To step in and create art that helps us imagine a different world. It's hard, but it's easier than the hard way. The hard way is war. It's a contest over scarce resources, and it implies human suffering and non-human suffering.